I'd like to quickly focus on one specific chemical undergoing review right now under TSCA, and that's asbestos. Unfortunately, your EPA's work on asbestos, in my opinion, clearly illustrates the problems in how you're implementing the Act. TSCA requires EPA to look at the intended conditions of use for a chemical, defined as the conditions under which a chemical is manufactured, processed, distributed, used, and disposed of. But in the scoping document for the asbestos risk assessment, your EPA has announced that you will look only at manufacturing, processing, and distribution, and you will not include the use, you will completely ignore asbestos that is being used and disposed of in this country. Let me just explain. The use and disposal of asbestos is the main source of risk from asbestos. If you ignore those things, you'll produce a risk assessment that fails to capture the risk to workers and ordinary Americans, and in my opinion, will not be scientifically valid and will not be protective of public health. So my question really is this: do you think you can just ignore certain things that are inconvenient for the industry? In other words, you're saying we'll look at the manufacturing process distribution, but we won't be looking at how it's used and disposed of in this country. You understand what I'm asking?
Yes, absolutely, and I think you raise a very valid concern. In fact, I had a conversation last week about this very issue with the chemical office. I think you raise a very, very meaningful concern.
All right, so hopefully, you know, we will see action on looking at the use and disposal. Is that correct?
I think it's a very important factor that we need to consider, and that's something I've already raised with the office that's overseeing this.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. The other concern I have is that now that Brazil has banned asbestos mining, all of the asbestos that's going to continue to flow into the United States will come from Russia, okay, because Brazil has banned it. So again, my concern is that the EPA's basically protecting Russian mining at the expense, I think, of American workers by saying that, you know, asbestos is going to continue to flow into the country, but it can't come anymore from Brazil. So would you just respond to that? The fact that right now, Russian mining is the only source for it, and we continue to allow it.
I think that, as you've indicated, this factor that hasn't been considered up until this point, that's something we're going to do going forward, and I think that's very important. I'm not really familiar with the import issue that you've raised. If there's an impact that we can have on that, I look forward to the discussion on how better we can influence that. I don't know what role we would play in that regard, but look forward to that discussion.
Well, I appreciate, again, your willingness to look at that, Mr. Administrator.
I think the primary issue is what you raised earlier, which is the disposal issue, I think, is very valid and something we need to look at going forward.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I just ask unanimous consent to put into the record a letter from Linda Reinstein, who's Executive Director of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, and a letter from the Safer Chemicals Healthy Families Coalition?
Without objection, it's order.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time expired.